Ooh. So we can get started. Hey everybody, thanks for joining sorry, I've lost my agenda already. There it is. The August 3rd meeting of the Reimagining Public Safety Committee meeting will come to order. As I said to those of you who were on a few minutes ago, I'm coming to you from my first cousin's childhood bedroom in Maine. So if I look like an unshaven guy with a map of the US behind him, that explains it. The first item on our agenda, as per usual, will be public comment. So does any member of the public seek to give public comment? If so, either raise your hand using the Zoom tool or just unmute yourself and start talking.
Oh, Mavis, sorry, I mentioned this before we started. We do have Michelle, our new deputy city attorney, on the call. I don't mean to put you on the spot, Michelle, but I don't, I just wanted to make sure that she was familiar with everyone here and you all were familiar with her. And I think
yes, I was just explaining to her, I'm going to try and find new hinges. Yeah,
so there you go. There you go. That was not me. I don't know what that background noise was,
but. Well, Michelle, if you're available in a place where you're comfortable unmuting yourself and saying hello to the group, obviously for a number of reasons, no small part of which is the pandemic, we've been operating with a tremendous amount of legal responsibility and a not full strength legal department, and we're all incredibly excited to see Michelle with her really sterling background and qualifications join our legal department, I believe, as the Deputy Corporation Counsel. So welcome aboard. And again, if you're in a place where you're comfortable unmuting yourself and introducing yourself to the group, that would be great. If not, I'm sure there'll be lots of other opportunities. I see Michelle unmuted herself, so I want to give her a moment. If you're trying to speak, we're not able to hear you. All right, well, technology is doing what technology does, but I do want to say, it's really exciting to have somebody of Michelle's, like I said, background and qualifications join our legal team, which has been doing doing an awful lot without enough person power. So welcome aboard, and we're all excited to work with you.
Thank you so much.
Oh, I'm sorry. There you are. Beautiful.
Oh, can you guys hear me now?
Sure can. Sure can.
Thanks so much. So I'm thanks, Mayor Biz, and thanks, Shanika. I'm Michelle Ozaribo, and I'll be Deputy City Attorney, and looking forward to working with all of you. So thanks so much. I'm actually in the office right now. That's why you can't see me, but there's no camera on my office computer. But yeah, thanks so much for having me.
Thank you, and again, welcome aboard. We're all very much looking forward to working together. So with that really encouraging announcement, let me move ahead to public comment. Is there any member of the public seeking to give comment? Which again, I think Betsy Wilson has done an old-fashioned hand raise using a physical hand in front of a physical camera. Go ahead.
Hey, with all the pressure, I couldn't find the virtual hand. But thank you, Mayor Biss. I wanted to touch base with you all because I think we're not doing what we promised to do. The mayor, the new city council, this committee, and me, and lots of our community have all expressed a commitment to reimagining public safety. I'm sorry for my dogs. You know what? Why don't I pause and let my dog stop barking? Or maybe I can. Anyway, so we're failing to live up to our commitment. When people ask me how we can defund the police, and what, if we defund the police, what do we do about sexual violence? What do we do about rape? Are we just going to ignore it? I tell them, no, police don't prevent sexual violence and they don't address the harm that it causes. If we're going to reimagine public safety, we need to be building different ways to achieve those goals. We need to be working as a community to examine and eliminate the misogyny and the patriarchy that make rape culture and sexual violence expected and accepted. When it occurs, we need to immediately identify the harm the survivors have experienced, and we must immediately offer them healing and work as a community to prevent that harm from reoccurring. And we failed. When Portia Davis and 56 other employees of the Parks and Rec Department came to our community and came to our city and told us that sexual harassment and violence was rampant in their workplace, our city dismissed them. We did not acknowledge the harm. We did not offer opportunities for healing. And we did not work to identify the causes of the systematic causes that allowed it to happen. Even now, we continue to fail. We still haven't apologized or offered opportunities for healing. The promised investigation is shrouded in secrecy. Current beach staff reports that they've received no training concerning sexual violence. And we've done nothing to change the culture that allowed the sexual violence to occur in the first place. We have no basis to conclude that it's not still occurring. If we're serious in our promise to reimagine public safety, we must work diligently and sincerely to keep our community safe. And we're failing to do that right now. Thank you.
Thank you for that. Is there anybody else who would like to give public comment? Okay. Well, before we move on, I think Betsy's critique is really an important one. Obviously there's a whole number of different components to it, but I think it's really, to me, the core of what Betsy said is that a component of what needs to be done is healing, is creating the restorative practice that will enable both the right kind of acknowledgement of what's occurred in the past, as well as empowering people who have been, who had power stripped from them to control not only the narrative, but also the mechanism of their own healing. And I think it's a really, really important point. So it's something I take seriously. I think we all, I didn't want to go past that without acknowledging that there's a series of really, really important critiques and observations, and I think places for us from which we all need to learn and plan moving forward. So I want to thank you for that. And before we move on to the next part of the agenda, I want to make a couple points that are owing to my own agenda building inadequacies, not on the agenda, but I think at least indirectly responsive to some of the points raised in that set of observations made and concerns raised by Betsy. The first is I wanted to just kind of make folks in this committee aware of a likely item that'll be on our agenda probably in one of the next two meetings, which once it's scheduled, I'll let folks know well in advance, because I think it could be a really interesting presentation. The ACLU has been partnering with municipal governments, communities roughly our size. They're not necessarily the giant cities that have kind of massive internal capacity already stood up, but rather communities of our size that have a significant governmental apparatus together with a significant kind of network of community activists who are trying to find a way forward to do really bold things around public safety. And they wanted to essentially present to this group kind of lessons that they've learned from communities they've been partnering with, and a potential roadmap that they would submit for our consideration. So I have nothing to add to that except to say I think it'll be a really valuable opportunity for us to move this work forward in a way that would be informed by pitfalls that have existed elsewhere, and that'll be coming, I believe, in likely 2 meetings from now, possibly 1, less likely 3, but coming up relatively soon. The second item that I wanted to raise,
Daniel,
which,
can I ask a quick question?
yeah, please.
Is it the ACLU or is it the ACLU of Illinois? Just out of curiosity.
ACLU.
The ACLU.
Yeah, I mean, I should say, Kadeen Bennett is like my hero, so it's done in discussion with the ACLU of Illinois as well. But there's no other community in the state of Illinois that they've done this work with. So it's really done with the ACLU, with lessons learned from places they've worked in other states. And I think likely the presenters would be someone from the national office together with Kadeen. Would be my expectation, though I can't, that's all pending their schedules and so forth. The second item that I wanted to flag is that I kind of promised in the last meeting that we were having useful discussions around the effort to do more when it comes to public engagement with this work. And I do have 2 kind of updates that I wanted to share. First of all, thanks to Patrick, I had a great discussion with Pam Citronbaum of the Moran Center, who is very, very enthusiastic to really bring some of the work that she and they have been doing around restorative practices, around restorative circles, around having trained a number of people, including some Evanston youth and many Evanston community leaders who are not, at least chronologically speaking, youth, in leading these discussions. And it was just a very, very encouraging conversation, because the indication was like, hey, listen, there's a bunch of people who we have trained or who we are in the process of training who could help be leaders of community discussions on these issues. And so I don't know if Patrick wanted to kind of follow up on that and kind of report back to the group at all, but I wanted to at least name that as something that I think we as a group are going to want to follow up on. And it looks like Patrick unmuted himself.
I'll just quickly add that I met with Pam today at 1 o'clock, and I've been away on vacation for 2 weeks, and I strongly encourage everyone to go on vacation for 2 weeks because it was really nice. But I finally met with Pam today at 1 o'clock to debrief, Mayor Biss, your conversation with her, and she shared that it was also a great conversation. And I think my main takeaway from debriefing with Pam, Daniel, is that we're going to take the next week to maybe even come up with a proposal for this committee to look at and entertain and dissect and say, this is great, this is horrible, so as you have something maybe that you could react to, because I think it's easier for folks to have something to react to, that kind of outlines where we think we have community leaders who are primed, ready to facilitate restorative conversations. And I think, to Betsy Wilson's point at the top of the meeting, could facilitate restorative healing conversations on many fronts that intersect with the work that we're doing in reimagining public safety. So I don't have anything today, but my hope is, I guess it wouldn't be next week, but I made the internal deadline for the Moran Center next week. So I guess we would have it prepared for you by the next meeting.
Well, that is exactly what I was going to ask for, because what she sent me, which was a really encouraging document, was a kind of a resource list.
Yes.
Which was
great.
Like I said, made me feel great because, wow, I want resources, and there were a bunch in that email. But if it's possible to bring a more kind of tailored proposal to the group 2 weeks from right now, I think that would be a very, very useful next step for the whole group to react to. I do not want to move forward on my own. I want to make sure the group is is really thinking together about how to do this. So that's phenomenal, and we'll just make sure that that's an agenda item, and we'll reserve time for it for 2 weeks from today. Thank you. The second related item is that Councilmember Fleming and Evangeline and I had a really, again, very encouraging discussion with Marisa Arona from the Alliance for Safety and Justice, who is offered ASJ to do what's been referred to as the train the trainer work. What they proposed is essentially to have first a kind of a focus group almost with each of the 3 working groups of this committee, followed by a public discussion with the full group that could be utilized as a tool to train us up on their methods and processes. So before I open it up for a discussion about whether folks want us to move forward with scheduling that, I wanted to give Evangeline a chance to speak to how that conversation went and kind of what your recommendations would be based on your knowledge of both the organization and the work that they do.
Yeah, thank you. It was a great conversation. ASJ is a very dedicated partner to municipalities and communities all over the United States. They were originally hoping that they could be in person actually for this opportunity, but they instituted some new COVID guidelines around travel restrictions again. So we will be doing whatever we do with them via Zoom. And it really is, in my experience, starting small and having these smaller working group conversations and then leading into giving us the capacity, right, for the trainer type of skill set and what to expect. And then making that a broader conversation with the community is a really great approach, I feel. I've been in some of their facilitation activities in the past, and they also did this with the 9th Ward with Councilmember Fleming. And it's always greatly appreciated and a successful experience for all. It highlights the blueprint for shared safety, which does center survivors. And so speaking to what has already been shared in this meeting, I wish I could say that it was just a very limited experience in terms of survivors feeling harmed by the city. But that's not just limited to sexual violence survivors, unfortunately. And so we have a bigger conversation that we need to discuss in terms of when survivors are harmed in the community, how does the city lead us towards a healing agenda, right? How do we make sure survivors are in the center of the conversations to provide feedback and to provide expertise, right? In the realms that we know too intimately. So it will be a great experience, I feel, to have ASJ as a partner in this. They do this, there's no fee, right? This is just a service that they do provide to communities who are looking to have these conversations and to move survivors to the center of the work for imagining public safety.
Thank you. Thank you so much for that. That's really, really helpful. So I would happily take any questions about that, but I also want to put a question to the group, which is, are we interested in moving forward with this, which essentially would mean, committing a little bit of time to engage in these discussions with professional staff from ASJ who are prepared to donate their time to do these kinds of trainings and lead these kinds of discussions, both to help us clarify our own thinking and our own work process, and additionally to help some of us get to a place where we're closer to able to do similar kinds of trainings in our own community. So feel free to reach out to jump in with questions now, but also would love to hear from everybody, kind of a thumbs up or thumbs down. Is that something you're willing to devote some of our collective time to? My vote, to be clear, is yes. I think it'd be wonderful, but I don't want to volunteer everyone else's time, and it's not something that will work if it's just a few of us. So I'm seeing some thumbs up. Is there anybody with concerns about moving forward with that approach? That perhaps that's the best way to handle it. Is if anyone wants to jump in with concerns or hesitations, now would be a great time for that. And if I don't hear anything, by tonight, then I'll reach back out to them and start to seek to put things on the calendar. Okay, beautiful. So I feel really great about this. It's been gnawing at me. That's the honest thing. It's been gnawing at me that I think we've had really important conversations. I think we've begun to make some progress. I think the working groups are beginning to make some progress. But this is not a 17-person operation. This is a 75,000 person community, and I think both the discussion that we're having with the Moran Center, that we're going to hear more about 2 weeks from today, as well as this effort with ASJ is a meaningful step to correct what I think has been an understandable but frustratingly sluggish effort to kind of reach out to the community and begin to open these conversations beyond this group, as well as the members of the public who have been generous enough with their time to join these meetings. So thanks to everyone for being enthusiastic about that, and thank you to Councilmember Fleming and Evangeline for making the connection with ASJ. Thank you to Patrick and the Moran Center. I think this is an absolutely essential part of our work. So with that, that little off menu bit of our meeting addressed, we can move on to what is now item 4 on our agenda, which is sort of the opposite of this. So we just talked about was progress that wasn't on the agenda, and what we're about to talk about is non-progress that was on the agenda. Because I candidly, I think, especially with my own vacation coming up, bit off a little bit more than I could chew in terms of organizing folks to put together a draft of a value statement. And so there is a Google Doc that has a few notes in it that a few folks have had a chance to work on, but it's just not, I didn't have the bandwidth to get it to where I wanted it to be so we could actually have a working discussion about it. So if someone wants to volunteer now in the moment to kind of lead that process over the course of the next 2 weeks, and again, what I mean by that process is putting together a draft. I don't mean a final draft. I don't mean something that everybody agrees to. I mean a draft to which people can react, and that can be used as a basis for further collective work. If someone wants to volunteer to that right now, you're welcome to. And I will pause for an awkward second in a minute, but I also acknowledge that may not be something anyone wants to jump in and volunteer to, because it can be a difficult and stressful project. And so if no one jumps in, we'll communicate via email to figure out a way forward on this. But for now, is there someone who wants to jump in and basically volunteer to take point during the course of the next 2 weeks to make sure that we have some kind of, let's say, roughly page-long document built off of the notes that already exist that could then be enough of a kind of clear narrative for this group to react to in 2 weeks? That is totally fine. If I were in your shoes, I wouldn't have spoken up either. So we'll do a little bit via email to kind of get this project moving. But again, it's really on me that we're not further ahead of where we're not where we are rather than where we had hoped to be at this point. So my apologies for that. The next item, I want to thank our Interim Chief of Police, Aretha Barnes, who, as you may imagine, given her title, has an enormous set of pressures on her time. She's joined us today to speak to this issue. There was an item on the Administration and Public Works agenda last Monday before the City Council meeting regarding some funding for essentially a partnership between EPD and the CTA. And some folks on that committee said, hey, listen, we have a Reimagining Public Safety Committee. Let's give them an opportunity to hear about this before we move forward, which was a very generous step taken by them. So that has therefore been kicked to us, which I think is really great. And Chief Barnes has agreed to kind of be a part of this meeting to essentially explain what the deal is. What is the nature of the partnership between the city, the police department, and CTA? What is the budgetary impact and the safety impact, and what are, what are the considerations that led staff to make the recommendation that was made a week ago. So thank you so much for joining us, Chief, and would love to hear kind of an explanation of how you'd recommend that we think about this issue. And I don't know if the chief maybe had to step away from, oh, I see you've unmuted yourself.
Hi, this is Louis Gergitz, Manager of Budget and Finance for the Police Department. Yes, indeed, the chief did have to step away for a few moments. She had to take another phone call. As soon as she's completed that phone call, she'll be back to talk about the relationship between the police department and the CTA.
Great. What we're going to do then, Lou, if you don't mind, is we'll just skip ahead to the next agenda item and then bounce back when we've completed that. Will that work for her?
Of course.
Great, thanks. So this brings us to the working group report out. And let's start with Councilmember Burns.
Yes, Patrick, if you could, so our working group has taken a look at the role of a peace officer and a law enforcement officer in state code as a starting point to get a sense of what that role is and how the authority is granted by the state. And I'm gonna call on Patrick to explain a bit more about what his specific questions were to his law clerk at the Moran Center, because they've been kind enough to do some research for us, and they provided a really good presentation for us at the last working group meeting. They're putting together a final memo, and then we'll have them back at the next committee meeting to continue the discussion. So Patrick, if you don't mind giving a little summary on that work.
Sure. So I have to give all credit to Bobby because he asked the question, really, Bobby, I think right at the outset of the working group meeting, of our first working group meeting. And the question basically is, what is a police officer? And I remember, Bobby, I have to admit, when you first asked the question, I thought, what a dumb question. And then you peel back the onion, and it actually is incredibly complicated. And I think Bobby was right to ask the question, because if we're going to reimagine public safety, I think you have to think about job function, and you have to think about what is within the purview of the city and what the state has very clearly provided is not within the purview of the city of Evanston or any home rule municipality. So what I can quickly say without reading to you a 6-page memorandum is that it is really unclear what a police officer is. And that unsurprisingly, in the Illinois compiled statutes, which many of you know is voluminous, the word peace officer is used repeatedly. The phrase law enforcement officer is used repeatedly. The phrase police officer is used repeatedly. Sometimes these phrases are defined, sometimes they are not defined. And often they are defined in opposition to each other. And unsurprisingly, many of you, these terms, these phrases are used in innocuous sections of the Illinois compiled statutes. So, we've had to do a lot of digging to find all of the ways that the state of Illinois has defined these what seemingly, I think I've always used in my practice interchangeably. But I think what Bobby taught us by asking us that question is there really are, there's meaning behind words, and that when we are using the phrase peace officer versus law enforcement officer, there actually may be a statutory distinction between those two roles that we can now point to in statute. So I received my first memo from my law clerk, and like any lawyer, I marked it up and asked 50,000 more questions to the law clerk. So she had to go back and is revising it. But I promised Councilmember Burns that I would get him a final draft by the end of the week. And now that we have Michelle on board, whether she realizes it or not, I'm going to send it to her too to see if she agrees with some of the conclusions that we made and if she also has additional questions based on anything we've presented as well. So that's the brief update.
Would it be okay if I interjected with 2 questions?
Yes, as long as you don't mind if I don't know the answers to them.
I'm confident that you and Councilmember Burns will know the answer to the first one, which is, can you remind everybody then which working group this is a report out from?
Yeah, sorry, this is rethinking the organizational structure. Rethinking the organizational structure committee.
Thank you. And that is my fault that I did not model that properly this week or 2 weeks ago or 2 weeks before that, but I'm going to get there. And so thank you. This is the group that's rethinking the organizational structure of the police department. And then my second question, which maybe there may be less certain that you know the answer. You talked about these 3 different phrases: peace officer, police officer, and public safety officer, that are all used multiple times in state statute. Is it the case that when we talk about a sworn officer here in the municipal government, we kind of act as though that person has all of the powers and responsibilities that are enumerated under those 3 different titles in state law?
Well, that is one of the questions that I actually posed to my law clerk, because it is unclear. And I actually failed to use another term, which we do not use in the city of Evanston, but is also incredibly confusing within state statute. Sometimes they use the word sheriff. And, when I think of sheriff, right, I think of the Cook County Sheriff, right, and the Sheriff Police Department. And but sometimes the statutes refer to sheriffs within local municipalities. So I failed to say that. There's actually 4 very, very commonly used words and or terms or phrases to refer to a police officer in our state. So the quick answer to your question, Daniel, is I don't know, and we're going to have to do some greater digging into that question. There we go. And I actually really do hope that the city law department will help us clarify if we're unable to dissect, that they'll help us answer that question too.
Thank you so much. Councilmember, did you have more, or was that?
Yeah, and then just to bring it all back home, I think the importance of all of this discussion is really trying to define, like, who has the power to arrest someone, right? If we need that function to happen in Evanston. And is it a peace officer? Is it a law enforcement officer? Who is given that authority? And under what circumstance are they allowed it? And is there room to create, is there room enough to create new positions around those roles, or is there room to create new roles? And if we create a new role, would they have the authority to arrest? Would they have the ability to bring workmen's comp complaints? And so this is what we're trying to figure out, really trying to determine what our limitations are based on state statute, because we're talking about reimagining. We want to see what the limitations and restrictions are. So this is the place we're starting. And then we're also looking at drug enforcement in the city of Evanston. So Councilmember Reed made a referral for the decriminalization of all drugs in Evanston, and he has since had conversations with peer services and TASK and ACLU and many other advocacy organizations that work around these issues, to figure out, in their terms, how to move away from carceral approaches to drug possession and move further towards treatment. And what we found out, Maureen from Peer Services was kind enough to present at our last working group meeting. I think what we figured out is that, and I'll just read off of one of the findings, if we expect that a new policy will have the consequence of moving more people to treatment, it is important to build up the infrastructure and funding for treatment providers to handle an influx of patients. There are concerns that the immediate nature of Oregon's decriminalization by referendum did not leave enough time for the scaling of this treatment infrastructure. And there are concerns that treatment providers could become overwhelmed. So I think what we're learning is that if we are to direct drug-related issues, especially on the user end, away from our carceral system and into our health system, we have to have the infrastructure built up to receive them same day, right? Not, okay, you can come back in and we'll schedule something in a week or we'll schedule something in a month. But if we are going to redirect where those, if we're going to redirect those cases, then we need to make sure that Peer Services and all the other organizations that are working with drug treatment and substance abuse, that they have the capacity to receive people and really start to help them almost immediately. Or from what they found in other places, decriminalizing drugs without that infrastructure built up won't have much of a material difference. And if anything, it'll just further stress our kind of public infrastructure, and we won't be able to meet the needs. So they're both, Julia, who is the law clerk at the Moran Center, is working on a memo, which Patrick described. And then also Maureen is working on a memo to help us think about what it would look like to expand our same day treatment availabilities here in the city. And once we have those memos, I'll send that out to our working group. We'll review it. We'll have them back on to present again. I'm sure we'll have questions, and then we'll move from there. So that's where we're at. Thank you.
Thank you so much. I think I'm going to go next just because it dovetails well with some of the legal questions you were enumerating. So the group that I'm reporting out from is the group that's going through data around patrol and traffic and thinking about alternative mechanisms of traffic and pedestrian enforcement. First of all, we've now, after a lot of back and forth, and again, thank you to the police department for the time you've spent helping us understand what options are available. We've put in a pretty hefty data request to the police department. I'm not going to walk you all through exactly what the requests are, because I think it'll be more interesting once we have the data in hand to walk you through what we've learned, but know that that is moving forward in a way that's encouraging. But we also had a really interesting presentation from Professor Jordan Blair Woods at the University of Arkansas Law School. He's done a lot of research and writing about alternative forms of traffic enforcement, and was really there to kind of answer questions that arise when you conceptualize very different ways of doing traffic enforcement. So how do you address questions of safety of officers that arise? What are the how do you enumerate the kinds of issues that are perhaps most naturally addressed by traditional sworn officers rather than some kind of civilian enforcement? For example, he flagged DUIs as something that in most places where he talked about were likelier to be left in the hands of traditional law enforcement. We talked about legal obstacles. He made the observation that in Berkeley, California, they passed a really far-reaching resolution that, among other things, articulated the plan to replace traffic enforcement with, instead of being done by traditional police officers, instead it would be done by by civilian city employees. And then after passing that, they realized that it's probably not legal in California. And so they're now engaging with their local state legislators to try to get statutory permission to do that. But in the meantime, that was a lesson to us about the value of doing legal research about what it is in state law that provides both powers and responsibilities exclusively to the police department, as opposed to other aspects of civilian city employees. So I think we learned a lot about the decision points in question. We're going to be hearing more thoughts on that in upcoming meetings, including from the police department and from other stakeholders. And I think there was really strong interest in digging into this in a serious way, and a lot of openness to really taking bold action there, but a strong desire to make sure that we think through all the questions, run all the traps, and also have everybody at the table before we take any rash action. So I left that conversation feeling like there's a real opportunity there. Definitely a lot of work left to be done before we're prepared to just take action. But I think there's something pretty promising that could make a real difference there. With that, let me turn it over to Andy Papachristos to state what working group he's reporting out from, and then report out.
Hi, everybody. So we're the Violence Prevention Working Group, and we had we're still kind of reporting back to each other from some of the various to-dos. We had a pretty good conversation about a couple of key issues, and we shared some resources which the committee's currently looking at and reading. And some of the resources included background on what the best practices within offices of public safety. Also some best practices and research on kind of data, what works in non-police violence prevention initiatives. Just as a reminder, this group has decided to focus squarely on the ground violence prevention while continuing to recognize the important systemic causes, but really looking at sort of some of the here and now responses to violence prevention, and also continues to try to center a victim-centered approach. So lots of our conversations were on and continue to be thinking about what are the assets and opportunities currently in Evanston around what we've been calling outreach efforts. Here we mean sort of direct outreach, whether it's happening sort of on the street or in parks and schools. There are lots of different spaces. I think a couple of things that we've noticed as issues we're going to dig into center on coordination of these efforts and how that gets done. Our ultimate goal is to come up with at least some recommendations for this committee to think about. But the reason we were looking at offices of public safety was one of the roles they are doing in other cities are coordination of these things, making sure that not only is outreach happening, but that there's directions towards appropriate services and departments and entities that exist, including potentially nonprofits. So there's this coordination issue, which folks are starting to weigh on. There's also this important differentiation issue. Conversations around what a 27-year-old and what a 12-year-old need are quite different, and we should recognize that the resources available are quite different. And so, cutting and pasting things become difficult, and we wouldn't recommend that. But seeing that as a point of really clarity, I do want to come back to one thing that the group I thought is feeling strongly about is, of course, the shifting ground or the evolving in different ways efforts in Evanston around outreach. There was a lot of talk about, are we currently meeting people where they are? Are we on the right blocks during the right times with the right people that are the right connectors, if you will? And so there were lots of examples of things that people like that Evanston was doing and around, say, COVID, for example, and thinking about what the parallel is in the context of violence prevention. Continued conversations around the gap in reentry and how that can be filled local, county, sort of, and what resources need to be coordinated, especially to make sure that the returning citizens have a way to access the things they need to kind of re-engage their lives and their families and communities. And then also really thinking through what, again, all of the committee members have been sort of populating some resources that people are trying to take a look at. To how can we think about these sort of case managements. So that's kind of where we left things off. Again, really trying to for me personally, but also professionally, understand how Evanston, of a city of its size, fits relative to other cities and their resources, what and how it means to sort of connect people that have been locked out or shut out or disenfranchised sort of in these spaces. So I just want to make sure for those at the committee, if I did a fairly accurate summary of that, If I missed any key points, please chime in. But that's kind of where we left it, with the idea of coming back and really drilling down on some of these kind of three things around coordination, differentiation, and what outreach can, does, and perhaps should look like as we reimagine these things.
Accurate assessment.
Yes, and I think the one thing that we're doing also as a committee is because Councilmember Fleming chairs the subcommittee, the Alternative Emergency Response Subcommittee, and I'm a member of that committee. We're doing a lot of conversation around that as well. Councilmember Burns, I heard you mention needing a physical space, right, for people who are struggling with substance use and other concerns. And that's one of the things our subcommittee has been looking at and is actually shifting to address with some type of living room model or to bring forward recommendations that would actually provide that physical space so that the only options are not the hospital or the police station.
Beautiful. Thank you so much to all three of you. That's great. And so I know that Chief Barnes is still tied up, but we have Deputy Chief Secluti with us. So if we could go back to item 5 on our agenda, Deputy Chief Secluti, could you give us, could you fill us in on the CTA issue?
Sure. So it's actually quite simple. Our department has an intergovernmental agreement with the CTA. And so what that means, or some of what that means, is that we have officers that work patrol specifically for CTA activities. As you all know, the CTA runs it's almost a 24-hour operation. It ends around between 1 and 2 a.m. that the trains stop in our city. And then they pick it back up again every morning between about 5 or 6 a.m. And the city of Evanston has 8 different L stops all the way from Howard running north all the way to Central. So officers can sign up for this detail. They work the detail. That's their primary focus for that assignment. And then we get reimbursed for what it costs for an officer to work it. I know there might be some questions, so if there are any questions, please.
Yeah, I'm sure there are. Does anyone want to jump in with any questions?
I have one, Mayor, really quickly. So this is Nathan Norman. Hi, Deputy Chief Melissa, how are you? My question for you is this something new? Is this something I can remember Evanston did something like this when I was younger, if I'm not mistaken? Would that be accurate?
Yes, this has, I don't know when we started this agreement with the CTA. I've been with the city for 18 years and it's always been a detail for police officers since I've been here. So I imagine it goes back much longer than that. But I'll have to find out the exact date of when we actually started this, but it has been going on for quite some time. And I should have emphasized that there are 2 shifts that the officers can work. They can work an AM shift, which is in the morning about 6:45 a.m. to 2:45 p.m. And then the next detail officer gets on at 2:45 p.m. and then ends at 11:15 p.m.
Thank you so much.
Sure.
And how many officers do we have? And so that would be an officer's full-time assignment during some period of time. Is that correct?
Well, there's a sign up for it. So what happens is every month, for example, the next month coming up is September. By mid-August, officers who are available or who want to work it will sign up through our Office of Administration on what dates that they're available to work it. So that would be their assignment during their time off. So say, for example, a CTA detail is open for me to work on Monday and I'm off and I'd like to work it for pay, then I can go ahead and sign up for that. So it really varies on, what officers work them, how many times they work them, because it's really a voluntary detail that that the Evanston Police Department is getting reimbursed for.
Understood.
A side job, maybe that makes more sense.
Right. Sean.
Real quick,
Right.
not to stomp on Sean, but Daniel, did you get your question answered? how many officers at a time?
Oh, yeah, that's right. So, but it sounds like basically it sounds like it's essentially overtime, right? So as officers are kind of interested in doing this essentially overtime work beyond their full-time responsibility, they sign up and then the city pays them for overtime and gets reimbursed for it. But I'm guessing you probably can't fill, I mean, I presume you're not able to fill 2 shifts every single day using that methodology, correct?
It is like an overtime, but it's not at the overtime rate. It's a already negotiated rate with the CTA. There are 2 officers every day, usually the AM and then the PM. There are certain times when certain dates can't get filled, for example, holidays, or sometimes during the summer months with everybody being on vacation, there might be anywhere from, 1 open shift to maybe 10. It really just depends on everyone's personal schedule. But usually at least half of the month is filled for both AM and PM shift.
And I guess the question in light of that is, does the department feel like it's like really good but not essential then to have those shifts filled? Because it sounds like tons of them are filled, but also plenty of them aren't filled. Is that viewed as, I mean, the difference between having someone and not having someone seems like a really big difference. Does the city have a strong position on whether we would hope to fill all the shifts if at all possible, or is it kind of okay the way it is now, or what?
Well, I think generally speaking, we like to have the trained detail there and for officers to work it, simply because it is a lot of work. And the person that works it, the officer that signs up for it, is dedicated solely to the CTA activities for that day. And, when you look at our CTA system within the city of Evanston, as I've stated, we have 8 L stops from Howard Street all the way up north to Central, with Davis especially being center city, and with a lot of foot traffic there. We do obviously prefer that it's filled, but there are days that there aren't. And 2, although there may be times where there aren't every single day filled in the month, depending on people's personal schedules, there are certainly times where every month, every shift is filled for, several months at a time. It just depends on, officers' availability, when they can sign up for it, if it fits with their own work schedule plus personal schedule, etc.
DC Secluded, quick question. With the purple line stops, I know it, like you're saying, it stops at Central. Does it go all the way to Linden? Does that count as the 8 stops, or does it stop at Central for our purposes? I just wanted to double check on that.
Thank you. That's a great question. So we stop our patrol activity for the detail at Central.
Okay.
Once it crosses over Central and goes over to Linden, we're now in Wilmette. So we stop our patrol activity at Central. And then we also stop it on the south end at Howard.
Makes sense. Got it. Thank you.
And does
Great
the
question.
Wilmette PD have a similar but smaller arrangement for the Linden stop? Does the Skokie PD have something similar for the 2 yellow line stops?
I don't know.
Okay. And what
I
about
don't know.
Chicago? How does it work within the city limits?
They have security guards throughout their stations. For example, if you go over to the Howard L stop, you'll see that they have a handful of security guards working that station. Throughout the city, I know that they also have a CTA unit that's dedicated to deal with robberies, disturbances, etc. But I don't have all the specifics on that, but I do know that they have their own officers also that are patrolling that and making sure that they're a police presence for their L stops as well. With
And by their own,
Skokie
is
and
that-
Wilmette, I'll have to find out.
And when you say their own, is that a CTA employee or a city employee inside of CPD, or a city employee outside of CPD?
They have had both.
Oh.
They've had both. At Howard, you will see a lot of security guards that are there, and also CTA, extra CTA personnel that's there because it's the end of their line, of the red line, and then also because it's a bigger stop with a lot of traffic. And then as far as all their other stops, you can see both security guards as well as uniformed police officers that are also being a presence at the various L stops.
Great. Thank you. Sean.
Thank you, DC Secluti. Real quick, sorry to clarify. So we have 2 positions in the morning and for a morning shift, and then 2 positions in the afternoon.
2 positions, 1 in the morning, 1 in the afternoon. So
Thank you.
1 officer each shift, AM and PM.
Thank you. Thank you.
Sure.
And then in the cases where you mentioned before where there were shifts that were not filled, what happens then? Does the CTA in Evanston then have no security?
We, as part of the beat officers' duties, they will patrol the CTAs, but it depends on, you know, how busy the day is. For example, in our downtown area, we have an officer that works our downtown area, and they have both the Metro and the Davis L stop there at Davis. That tries to be you know, we try to have that to be a routine stop for patrol officers to conduct directed area patrols at. But depending on how the day is, sometimes there may not be stops over there, depending on what the call volume is, the types of calls that we're getting, other reports that we might be taking, other enforcement action that we have to be taking somewhere else, aldermanic, you know, aldermanic request, etc. So the nice thing about having the detail is that when an officer is signed up to work those details for the train, that is their sole activity for that day. That's their purpose for that day, is to work the train, to ride it back and forth, to track all the train stops, to check in with the people that are working the train stops, etc.
If I can just make sure I'm just maybe say that, make sure I'm on the same page, perhaps sort of rephrase the answer slightly. So it sounds like you're saying basically, yeah, sure. I mean, we've got a police department. We can deploy our officers any way we like. And if there's nobody on this CTA shift, then we can, you know, person hours available, deploy folks who are already, you know, doing their ordinary shift with EPD to do some of this work. But to the extent that our hope would be for CTA to pay for security, this is the only way it gets done. It's not like if we don't fill these slots, then CTA backfills with some other form of security that they are covering. Is that right?
Correct, right. If they don't backfill, then there is none. And, you know, it's as I've stated, the beauty of having this detail is that the officers, they know that that's their specific assignment for that day. They're signing up for it. And so for that specific day, whether it's an AM shift or a PM shift, they are dedicated to working the train detail for that amount of time.
Okay, great. We're 1 minute past 6. There's one hand up, so I'm going to call on Betsy really quickly, and then we'll have to wrap. But Betsy Wilson's hand is up.
Thank you. I'll be faster and quieter than last time, I hope. I was just wondering, since this seems like a good opportunity for some data comparison. What do we know about reports of violence on shifts when there is a EPD officer on duty and when there is not? And what do we know about the kinds of incidents that they're called to respond to? I'm not sure that we have time to answer that question now, but I think those are important pieces of information as we're thinking about this.
I see the chief just unmuted herself.
Good afternoon. I just wanted to say that those statistics are available. In fact, I did send some over to Council Member Kelly from January 1 of this year through to date. So we can get some data for you on that.
Great, thanks. That'd be really interesting to see, because as she says, it's a natural experiment that's been created by this weird situation that lots of shifts are going unfilled. So we can see if they're what difference that generates. All right, so we're past 5 o'clock. I think I said 6 before. I'm on the Eastern time zone. I apologize. We're past 5 o'clock, so I'm gonna break. I guess I would ask for people For people who have, I think it'll be really valuable for us to see the data that the chief just mentioned, and I'll circulate that with the group when I have it. But I would just say for folks who have concerns about continuing with this project, just shoot me an email, let's say in the next 48 hours by close of business Thursday, and we can, I'll make sure that those concerns are heard and addressed before the city moves forward. And obviously one option is to like be concerned and try to stop this. One option is just to say this seems great. One option is to say let's continue doing this but monitor it carefully, so that we have all the data in hand next time a question like this arises. So all of those are different reactions you might have, but I'll just say for anyone who wants to kind of raise a red flag before we move forward, shoot me an email again by close of business Thursday, and I'll make sure that all that gets incorporated and taken seriously before the council moves forward. I want to thank the chief for joining us, and for your help letting us see this data that'll help us better understand this. And thanks everyone for your participation in this meeting. We obviously have some homework that came out of this. I'll send some emails around. And again, we'll look forward to, among other things, hearing from the Moran Center 2 weeks from today. So our next meeting is Tuesday, August 17th at 4 p.m. And with that, with nothing else on our agenda to be addressed, the Committee on Reimagining Public Safety stands adjourned.